Cattle markets were under pressure again this week. Welcome to the weekly livestock market update on Brownfield. I'm your host, Meghan Grebner. With us this week is ag economist Josh Maples with Mississippi State University Extension. Josh, it's great to see you.
Hey, Megan. Great to see you too.
It's nice to catch back up again. And while there aren't a lot of reports for us to talk about, there's plenty for us, I think, to discuss when it comes to the markets. But first, let's recap what happened this week in livestock markets.
Yeah, so another active week. Certainly we can jump into talking a little bit more about that. But if we look at what happened for live cattle prices, live steer prices averaged $228 and 97 cents per hundredweight for the 5 market average at the end of the week. This was down about $2 from a week ago, still up about $42 from where we were a year ago. But we did see some pressure on those markets given some of the volatility that we've seen in futures markets, especially. The December live cattle futures contract down $8.53 per hundred from a week ago. That puts the December contract at $221 and 15 cents per hundredweight. Looking over at the feeder cattle side, Megan, this is where we saw a lot of movement. November feeder cattle down $12.88 per hundredweight on the week to $326 per hundredweight. This is down pretty sharply from where we were quite recently. Look at choice box beef, $377.43 at the end of the week. This was down about $2 from where we were last week. Switching over to the hog side, cash hogs down 91 cents at the end of the week. This was $87.36 per hundredweight. For hog futures, the December contract was down $1.65 to $79.63 per hundredweight on the week. And then the pork cutout value was down about $1 from where we were a week ago to just under $100 per hundredweight, sitting at $99.75 per hundredweight for the pork cutout value.
We'll get into cattle markets a little bit more coming up. I do want to talk a little bit. We've seen a pretty significant slide on the cash hog side of things. How much are we watching this movement, and are we really kind of thinking about this in terms of seasonal trends and kind of what happens this time of year?
Yeah, I think that's a big part of it. Is just we're getting to the time of year where hogs and cattle as well. We can talk as we get to the beef side that we start to see some seasonal trends. So not huge disruptions, I guess, at this point, but certainly something to keep an eye on as we move through these seasonal patterns.
Let's jump into slaughter numbers. As you take a look at that weekly slaughter, it's really interesting kind of to see how these have been moving for both cattle and hogs.
Yeah, so cattle slaughter this week estimated at 555,000 head. This would be down about 4,000 head from where we were a week ago, down 65,000 head from where we were this week last year. On the hog slaughter side, 2.63 million head. This was up about 60,000 head from where we were a week ago, and up about 30,000 head from where we were a year ago. So some increases on the hog side, and then decreases on the cattle side.
Okay, so kind of the big news we found out this week, USDA would resume, or late last week, early this week, USDA was going to resume some of these reports, even though the government shutdown continues. As we look ahead, we'll get supply and demand on the 14th. We will get a cattle on feed report this month as well. What are some of the things that you're thinking about in terms of that information?
I think on the cattle side, especially, Megan, just looking for some fundamental data to come out to hopefully bring a little bit of certainty to this uncertain environment that we've seen play out in futures markets over the last few weeks. A lot of the volatility, we've talked before, driven by uncertainty around various things that are being talked about. This started a couple of weeks back with the discussion of a plan to lower beef prices. But it seems like every day, or certainly every week, there's some discussion about some new or some reoccurring uncertain thing that makes traders a little hesitant. I mean, and it makes markets has made markets more volatile the last few weeks. So that's one of the things that these types of reports provide. They provide fundamental data that markets can absorb, and so they can, as we start talking about basics of supply and demand. What we're really looking for is data on supply and demand, and so whenever we have, I think sometimes when we have these, we take them for granted a bit, but they really are key to understand what's going on in these markets right now. So I think it'll be really important to get these series back on a regular schedule so that we can look at it and understand a bit more of, in particular, are we actually seeing any sort of changes to herd size on cattle? That's a key question that does have market implications, and we've been a bit in the dark on it. For certainly missed out on some key pieces of data in October that would have been helpful.
I would assume when that November report comes back in, there's not going to be heifer data breakdown that we would have gotten in that quarterly in October, or are we just kind of in a wait and see to see what kind of information is released?
Yeah, it didn't say anything in the announcement. I think a lot of us were hopeful that when it was resumed that best case scenarios we would actually go back and get the October report too. We would get the October report just late and then get the November report. The announcement didn't say that. The announcement just said that the cattle and feed report would come out on November 21st as scheduled. It mentioned nothing about the October report. So yeah, just kind of wait and see what we get. Really hope that we at some point get that quarterly heifer on feed number. That's just so important for where we are right now in this cattle cycle. So very hopeful that if not in this upcoming report, that we will get that at some point. But would have been great to have it a few weeks ago, certainly with everything else that's going on in the markets.
There's also, we've not been getting trade data.
Mm-hmm.
Thinking about that, and maybe, is it maybe more impactful on the pork side of things, or does it matter for beef as well? But continuing to not see what is happening in terms of the global market and demand for U.S. red meat products.
Yeah, I think it's important for both. I mean, certainly, and I think one thing that gets a little bit lost is Brazil, for example. We saw the tariff increase on Brazil in August. We don't have trade data since July, so a lot of the conversations that are going on about what impact has that had, we're really kind of in the dark on that. And now we're to the point where there's discussions about other tariffs getting removed or reduced or increased access to other places. So it's been difficult to really understand what's going on in the trade environment. We've got the first 6 months of the year, we got through July, but that's it. And so we're having to guess quite a bit on both the pork side and on the beef side. So yeah, certainly looking forward to that trade data coming back so we can hopefully start to make some sense of how trades have adjusted in the last couple of months.
Does that also, when we look at the trade data as well, show us an impact of what the tariff situation, we had the different tariffs put on different countries, and does that, not having that information and how much is going where, does that potentially negate some of the impact of the tariffs to the ag sector, not having that piece of information?
Well, I don't think it negates the impacts of it. I think it negates us knowing the impacts of it. So I think that, certainly, if there any tariffs that are put in place are going to impact the flows of that meat going, in or out of the country, depending on who puts the tariff on. And see, again, Brazil is a great example here. So, I think a lot of analysts assume that with that much higher tariff, that we probably didn't send or didn't get as much beef from Brazil for a period of time, maybe still happening. And so then we had a lot of discussions about Argentina over the last couple of weeks. But really, kind of behind that or underlying that was this situation with Brazil. And we don't really know what the impact there has been. And so it's just, again, it creates a lot of uncertainty about, what meat is actually flowing to and from where, and then trying to understand what impact that might have on meat availability here.
There's been speculation that the southern borders, are going to reopen at some point. That's kind of been the talk. I believe Secretary Rollins said this week that she wasn't quite there yet. Like she was, they've made progress, but we're not there yet. Does news like that have a greater impact when we're not seeing concrete data about what's going on with the herd? And so there's maybe some more reactionary from the board in seeing this volatility that we've seen so much of this week?
Yeah, I think it's, whether it has more, I think probably so. It does have more impact just because we don't have those fundamental data series. And so the, markets seem to, markets are information forums. That's just one of the great things about the futures market is it is a place for markets to absorb information very quickly. And so when we have a report come out, we get a WASDE report out, we get a cattle on feed report come out, we get a cattle inventory report come out. These markets can absorb that data and that information really, really fast. And whenever we don't have those data or those reports, markets are still trying to absorb all the information that's out there. It's just less of it. And so, yeah, anytime you're in an environment like that, and new pieces of information or speculation about pieces of information come around, they can certainly lead to bigger swings than they would have, potentially led to in an environment where we had kind of that expected data that we would get through these reports. So, yeah, I think it can. It's impossible to say that they were, that news that you just mentioned about the potential for the border reopening at some point had more or less impact than it would have if we'd had the reports in place. But it certainly came at a time where we had less kind of fundamental information that we would expect. And, we do generally expect that, when the border does reopen, that will have some, negative impact on prices. It's feeder cattle prices, especially in the southern part of the U.S. The supplies have been much tighter there because fewer cattle have been coming in. And so if and when that happens, I have no idea when that's going to happen, but that will put some pressure on those markets. And so that probably did play out some in futures markets this week as a reaction to speculation about that.
All right, before I let you go today, we're going to talk a little bit about cattle slaughter. What are some of the things that you're looking at in terms of levels and what that's indicating?
Yeah, I think the slaughter totals are matching up pretty well with kind of where we expected to be this time of year, given the tighter calf supply numbers and just tighter inventory numbers. So, I'm really interested, Megan, to see how the beef cow slaughter number plays out over the next couple of months. I think that's going to be pretty telling for us. I think we've mentioned on here before that if we're going to see that January 1 cattle number or beef cow number be close to a year ago, then a lot of that's just going to come from the fact that we didn't process as many beef cows. And so I'm really interested to see how that plays out over November and December and October, just kind of looking back a little bit too, as producers decide do they carry that cow through the winter or not. So I think that's going to be really key for us. Also really interesting to look at the split between heifer slaughter and steer slaughter to try to look at trends there. But I think so far we're not seeing clear signals of expansion. That's become a theme of our conversation here lately. but those slaughter totals are another one that we're going to kind of be watching to try to look for those signals.
Thinking about the things that come into play here, obviously, feed input cost, those things also weigh heavily on producers' decisions to retain or to expand. But also, I mean, how much are interest rates also still coming in to play as producers are having those conversations, thinking about managing risk, bottom lines, and how things pencil out?
Yeah, I think Megan, as much as you see the words interest rates in news, I'm still not sure we talk about it quite enough for cattle sector and expansion. I do think it's a bigger headwind uh, than probably the attention that we give it. All the other stuff that you mentioned is absolutely true. And to be fair, a lot of times whenever we say higher input costs, we're kind of building in the fact that we've got higher interest cost as well, our higher interest rates. Another thing to mention, and you've probably talked about it some this week, but we have seen some rallies, certainly in soybean prices. That absolutely spills over into feeder cattle markets. If corn prices go up, or the expectation of corn prices into 2026 goes up, that is usually a negative impact on feeder cattle prices, because you think about feeder cattle and corn, or feeder cattle and feed, are the two ingredients that go into making live cattle. As the cost of growing, or cost of adding weight to those cattle goes up, then we typically see the cost of or the price of the cattle themselves go down. So, that was another piece this week, as we see the trade deal with China and boosting, or the discussion of trade with China anyway, and seeing soybean prices go up. That's going to be another thing to keep a close eye on, as we continue to see what's going to go on with cattle prices.
There will definitely be plenty for us to talk about into the new year.
Absolutely. This is hopefully the volatility isn't quite as wild as it has been. I mean, even this week we saw some really big swings, but we're far from, we're at the end of this cycle. This is the time when things get crazy, and when exactly the cycle ends, we don't know, because we don't have clear signals of expansion just yet. But this is a time where we've got really high prices, but we can also have some pretty strong volatility, especially whenever we have stuff from the outside coming in.
Josh, it's great to see you.
You too, Megan. Thank you.
To have our weekly livestock market update delivered to your email box every Saturday, go to brownfieldagnews.com. You can also submit questions and comments. And for market updates twice daily, make sure to check out John Perkins' Market Minute. Have a great weekend. I'm Meghan Grebner for Brownfield.